The cause of all the problems in the world is sin. And the answer is individual personal repentance. Go to confession. By the way, excellent thing to do today. Nab a priest and ask him to hear your confession. A fiction story came to my mind. The Lord of the Rings. And what happens in the Lord of the Rings? You have this battle between good and evil.
Put on the coffee and get ready to open the scriptures. It's time for Bible with the Barbers. Now, here's Terry and Mary Dannielle.
And so we're talking about the light, that the light, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and He is the light. He brings life, and that life is the light of men. And so in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, we read, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shined." And then it goes on. And then verse 6, how is this light come? Who brings this light? "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." And so we have this son of David who's going to be born, who's going to bring light into the darkness of the world. And I want to share with you today some thoughts from the Advent Christmas newsletter of the Opus Sanctorum Angelorum. And they talk here in this about scattering the darkness in the light of Christ. So that's what our theme is today. We want to know that Christ is our light, okay? And He comes to scatter the darkness. And what is the darkness? Well, the darkness is sin, quite frankly. It's very simple. It boils down to that. You know, we say, well, what's the cause of all the problems in the world? And we talk about this, we talk about that. And what's the solution? Oh, education, more money, more this, more that, you know. And it all comes down to this: sin and repentance. The cause of all the problems in the world is sin. And the answer is individual personal repentance. Go to confession. By the way, excellent thing to do today. Nab a priest and ask him to hear your confession. It's the end of the calendar year, a New Year's beginning. Make a resolution that beginning now you're going to start going to confession once a month at minimum. So how do we scatter this darkness? Well, it's interesting. Did you notice when the shepherds are watching their flocks at night? It's midnight, okay? They're in the darkness. These men are out there at night watching the flocks. And an angel of the Lord comes, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. All of a sudden, there's light. But what brings this light? This light is the message of the birth of Christ. The angel is announcing the birth of Jesus Christ in Bethlehem of Judea. And what's interesting is the angels represent something. The angels represent all of us, okay? They were living on the outskirts of society, watching in the night, but they're images of the Christian vocation in the world today. We live in a world where the darkness is growing and growing and growing all around us. The darkness of spiritual confusion and blindness, the darkness of sin and coldness of heart, a society without God, therefore with no moral foundation. Yet God sends His angels even today with the light of His love and the message and the mediators of His presence among us, His mercy and help in the darkness of the world around us. A child is born to us, a son is given to us, and that is Christ. The angels announced His birth. It's interesting. As I was reading this newsletter, a fiction story came to my mind. The Lord of the Rings. And what happens in the Lord of the Rings? You have this battle between good and evil, and the darkness is growing, and more people are being sucked up into the darkness. And if you remember, there was one particular king. He wasn't actually a king. He was a steward, the steward of Gondor. And the steward of Gondor had a little ball he could look into where he could see the future or what was going on. But the interesting thing about it is these little things were in the control of the enemy. They were in the control of him who was spreading the darkness, okay? And so when he would look into it, he could not see any way that good could triumph over evil. And he began to despair, and he does despair, as a matter of fact. The steward of Gondor despairs, and he actually tries to, in his despair, tries to kill the only son he has left, Faramir. And it doesn't work because Gandalf is there, and one of the hobbits is with him at Gondor. They're defending Gondor from the enemy. And here's the deal. That is instructive for us. The purpose of the fiction is to help us to realize sometimes that it can be an analogy of the spiritual life and help us to see. And the steward of Gondor was only looking at things from his perspective and from the perspective of the enemy. And of course, the enemy wants us to believe that he's defeated us and that he's won. But the reality is the enemy has been defeated. Jesus Christ came and the enemy was defeated. The darkness has been scattered. The light is present. But we have to still walk through the darkness. And in the darkness, we have to look to Christ so that we don't get caught up in this temptation of the enemy to say, you see, I've won already. There's no point in resisting anymore. Every time you have that temptation, you give in, you fall. I mean, why try anymore? Just give up. God doesn't care. Well, you know what? That's the enemy thinking. God does care. You see, every time we fall into sin, it degrades us as human persons. It degrades the image of God in us. And that's offensive to God. God doesn't want us degraded. He wants us to live in union with him. And so we have to, in this night of the world that we live in, we have to keep our eyes fixed on the light, on Christ. And the angels are there to help us. God has given every one of us a guarding angel to give us light. But are we doing the things necessary to receive the light? Are we praying every day? Do we go to Mass every Sunday, every holy day, and during the week if possible? Are we praying our rosary, the Chaplet of Mercy? Are we going to confession on a frequent and regular basis? Are we reading the scriptures? By the way, if you're going to daily Mass, you can read and meditate. Every day you'll hear the scriptures. And Sunday, of course, you hear more. But you have this opportunity, but we need to open ourselves. And spiritual reading is very important to keep us from believing that the enemy has won. Because the enemy hasn't won. He's lost. Okay? But we have to fight the battle. And the battle has been won. Christ won the battle. He won, but we need to engage in the battle with him. All right? So we want to keep our eyes on Christ and remember